as already introduced, I'll just say my name is Arvind Sharma, and I welcome you all to this session, which I will be moderating. And allow me to spell out the plan for this session so that we know what to expect. I shall first offer some introductory remarks for about 15 minutes. And this will be followed by the presentations of the three very distinguished panelists, each of whom will also address us for 15 minutes. Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Okay. In the final session, we will have question and answers for about maybe 15 or even more time this time, as per the new arrangements. So let me say what I have to say before I turn to the three speakers to listen to whom we have assembled here. I would like to begin by recalling a comment which I think was made by George Orwell.
Because it would be against fire.
This is what he said: one who controls the past controls the future. One who controls the past controls the future, and one who controls the present controls the past. So who are the people who control the present for us English-speaking Hindus, so to say? Who are the people who are telling us what we are or should be at the moment? From whom comes the challenge to who we are? It comes mainly from the West, in the broadest sense. As I see it, these Western challenges to Hinduism come mainly from three constituencies. The word Western here includes their Indian acolytes. These three constituencies are Indologists, 1, 2, liberals, and 3, Marxists. I realize that the categories are not mutually exclusive. Now, why do they resent Hinduism so much? This is what I am trying to get at. Okay? Those Western Indologists who attack Hinduism, not all of them, those who do so because Hindu self-understanding challenges Western understanding of Indian history and culture and undermines their 3 centuries old hegemony. Hindu civilization is the only example of a major civilization in the modern world, the reconstruction of whose past and culture in modern times is not the work of its own scholars, but of Western scholars. The historian K.M. Panikkar is worth quoting on this point. This is what he says in his book, The Foundations of New India. I quote him now. All this reconstruction of India's past and the translation and popularization of great Indian philosophical and religious classics was the work almost exclusively of European scholars. English, German, French, Swedish, Russian. In fact, scholars from every part of Europe. End of quote. Western scholars seem as reluctant to relinquish their control over Indology as the British were reluctant to relinquish their control over India. And seem to resent the revisions Indology must undergo if the new evidence especially pertaining to Vedic chronology, is to be entertained. Now we come to the liberals. The liberals are opposed to Hinduism for a very deep reason as well. The liberal vision of India is essentially a Macaulayan one. Macaulay was even willing to contemplate with equanimity. This is very important. Macaulay was even willing to contemplate with equanimity the dissolution of British rule over India. Statement in the Parliament. If the legacy of this rule then continued in the form of the English language, Western political and legal institutions, and this is important, the conversion of India to Christianity. All the elements of this vision have been realized except conversion to Christianity. The challenge for the Marxists has equally deep roots. Marxism wants to see society divided into two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, at odds with each other. Such a horizontal division of society is prevented by cultural loyalties of language, religion, and so on, which cut across such divisions horizontally, vertically. Both the worker and the capitalist, the rich and the poor, could be Hindus. This does not suit its agenda, nor Hinduism's commitment to concord, which goes against communism's preference for strife. Hence the bitter enmity of Hinduism. So the Western Indologists, the liberals, and the Marxists pose a joint challenge to Hinduism. Now this concludes my presentation. Now before I invite the panelists to offer their remarks, I would like to make a few requests to the speakers. I would like to request the speakers to stay within the limit of 15 minutes and to say a few words about themselves before they deliver their address. I know it is usually the moderator who introduces the speakers, but I would prefer that you come to know them as they would like you to, rather than me. It is now my privilege to invite all of them to the dais. Okay. I would now like to invite one of India's leading public intellectuals, Shri Rajiv Malhotra.
Namaskar. In the interest of very brief amount of time, I'll get to the point right away. Education and Hinduism has two different aspects. We can think of the topic as education about Hinduism. So about what it is, its history, the pujas, the deities, the itihas, the texts, great grand narratives, and that itself is worth many days of conversation. Another view which I propose to you is to see Hinduism as the drishti, the lens through which there is education about the whole world. So it's not, when you talk about Hindu education, it's not, why limited to education about Hinduism, it's also the Hindu view of science, the Hindu view of society, the Hindu view of culture, the Hindu view of politics, family, environment, healing, health, whatever. So the Hindu view of it means that Hinduism is the subject which is viewing, rather than positioning Hinduism merely as an object to be viewed. So that's my first point, that when you talk about this, when we limit ourselves, when we limit the definition of this subject, this topic, to a discussion about Hinduism, we're kind of colonized. We assume that the drishti has to be a Western drishti because they are universal. Their drishti is the drishti of the whole world. And then they're just looking at us like they're looking at everything else. And we have to it's like a defensive posture. A more exciting, interesting, assertive posture is to say that we challenge Western universalism with something that we can call Vedic universalism. So that means the subject of Hinduism is, the education is much broader than education about Hinduism. It's also how would education work? How did education work in our gurukuls, in our pathshalas, and it had a lot to do with our yoga, our meditation. All of these were brought in. The use of multimedia in the form of singing, dance as part of the education process. Why are certain people more creative? Why did certain people become very smart? What does it have to do with the system of the Vedic culture? So that view of Hinduism and education would be a different view, broader view, and I propose that's a more interesting one. My second point is, and I have about 8-10 points, and then there's Q&A. My second point is that there is a big distinction between research and education. So, if you only talk about education, it means that the knowledge base is fixed, predetermined, and now we have to teach this knowledge to other people. So, I feel that the real problem is deeper than education. The real problem is research, because the places where research is done are producing output based on a certain point of view, a certain metaphysics. I will come to that in a moment. And since that is already colored and tainted with a particular agenda, a particular history, and a particular point of view, the research that is coming out about us and about everybody else is therefore equally tainted. So this means that whether you are looking at Hinduism as the research methodology, or whether you're looking at it as the educational methodology, you are looking at it as the lens through which research and education have to happen. This is a very big repositioning, and all these different groups that are doing education, trying to reform, are not going far enough, in my opinion, and challenging the very methodologies and premises on which the Western establishment does its research and its thinking. So when we are challenging, what they are saying about Hinduism, we are limiting ourselves to the pedagogy and the methodologies that they have defined. So we are playing by the rules of the game that they have defined. So that to me is an issue. Next point I want to make is the colonization of our methodologies, our drishti, which affects our research, which affects our education, is not something that starts with Europe. It starts 1,000 years earlier. There is an Islamic colonization. We have to come to terms with it. We have to be able to say there is an Islamic colonization of India, which brings in another language, another religion, another way of life. Certain things are not okay. And we go through a process of not only truncating and getting rid of, or being forced to get rid of certain practices, but also many of our practices get digested and become Islamized, whether it is Bhakti becoming Sufiized, whether it is some of our languages becoming Urduized, whether it is the mathematics going through the Arabs being called Arab numerals and so on, and many other things. So the Islamic colonization is a layer of colonization we cannot ignore. We cannot just start with Europe. Having said that, let me first tell you that the effect of this colonization is two, three levels, 2-3 layers. First of all, there is a clash of metaphysical assumptions. There is a clash of metaphysical assumptions. It's not just they're bad people and we are good people, that's not that. It's just that certain people have been raised with a certain metaphysical assumption. Some of it is conscious, some of it is unconscious. There is a large amount of Western metaphysics, Islamic metaphysics, Chinese metaphysics, Vedic metaphysics, which is sort of just assumed and become part of our way of life. We aren't even conscious of it. And then there's a large part that we're conscious of. Now these metaphysical assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of the self, the nature of society, all of that, what is society, what is culture, all of that is quite different from one system to another. So the foundations of difference between one system and another are metaphysical. And I say it with mutual respect. I'm not knocking down. I'm just saying that they are different and we ought to understand them. Because they are different, the Western system does not have the adhikar to say that they are universal. That's where I have a problem. I have no problem understanding, appreciating, respecting the Western worldview as one of the worldviews, provided our worldview is also given equal status. The statement, and then there is a lot of, because these metaphysics are different, the frameworks are different, the one that has more power studies the one with less power. There is an asymmetry of power. So we are the object of study through the Western metaphysical lens, and before that the Islamic lens. And what doesn't fit is criticized and rejected. What they like they want yoga, they want meditation, there's so many interesting things they want mathematics from us. Those are retrofitted, adapted, distorted to fit into their framework. So that is what I call the latter part, I call digestion. So it's like a predator eats a prey and digests it into his own DNA, into his own cells, and the prey disappears. Similarly, a large part of what is called Western civilization is actually the product of digesting the Vedic civilization. This is a very... I have about 10 plus volumes in different stages in the pipeline on digestion. Digestion in mathematics, digestion in linguistics, digestion in botany, digestion in so many areas of science, one after the other, to show you that a large part of Western civilization would not have been possible without the fact that without them going around colonizing and digesting useful things from various places. So here I have to disagree with my friend, the chair, Professor Sharma, who said that the Westerners criticize or have problems, I'm not using the exact words, but the reason they have bias and the reason they have problems with India and Indology is that they don't want to give up their control. And I will say, if they were to give up control, and if they were to give up that bias, the real fear they have is that the Vedic civilization being brought into its proper place and the history of world civilizations being corrected as to the role of the Vedic civilization, how it has played in civilizing the West, if that were to come out, it would threaten the very idea of a Western civilization. So it is not just offensive, it's also defensive. It's self-protection, self-preservation. The whole idea of a West, if you look at Hegel as the pioneer of Western thought, and you look at a century or two before that and a century after that, which is the pivotal period when Western civilization, the concept that we are the West, comes about. And you look at how much they studied Buddhism, how much they studied the Vedas, how much they were involved in all this, and really excited about who, whether it's the Germans. See, the Germans had an inferiority complex because the British had their empire, and they had English, and they said they are the originators of democracy, so that's the proud, grand narrative they were teaching. And the French were the inheritors of the Renaissance, so they were teaching we are the great inheritors of the Renaissance. Germans were told that they are barbarians, that they are the destructive people. they really needed a narrative for themselves. That is true. They were the barbarians known all over Europe. So they needed a positive narrative for themselves. So their discovery of proximity of German and Sanskrit was a huge opportunity for them to say, aha, that's who we are. So this whole idea of the quest for studying India starting in Germany was really a quest for defining their own selfhood. And then the British got involved in it because they wanted to make sure that the legitimacy of the empire can be protected in the way they spin out Indology, and the French were involved. So if you look at the competitiveness of various Indologies coming from various parts of Europe, it maps into their own competition with each other. So it's really a quest for European selfhood that led them to the study of India. And still today, the threat that Vedic civilization would offer to the very notion and superiority of Western civilization remains tall. Because why wouldn't they want to control the study of Japan? It's a great country. Why not in the same way? Why aren't they obsessed with the study of Nigeria or Mexico or whatever? Those are wonderful countries. Why only India? It's because the corpus of knowledge, civilizational knowledge in the Vedas has to be contained, has to be kept aside, has to be either distorted or somehow not given its proper place, because the very notion of a greatness and superiority and universality of Western civilization would be threatened if this were allowed, if the Vedic civilization were given an equal place. This is a very, very big shift in consciousness that I want to encourage you. Now, besides the metaphysical differences, there are also differences in history. The history that happened in one place is not like the history happened in some other place. So the West has this history, the European history of clash with science, then the clash within Christianity of Reformation of Protestants versus Catholics. That shaped their lens, and that lens has been applied to India with ideas like secularism and things of that sort, which just don't apply. So that's another problem we are dealing with, that the European history is being superimposed upon us. Add to that the institutional mechanisms that protect the study of all this stuff in the Western world. And I study this a lot because by training I'm an industry analyst. So before I got into this, I used to analyze industries. So I analyze the study of India as an industry. Who studies it? Who funds it? What's their agenda? What's their output? How do they use it? And it's an amazing and it's a very large, complex story. So this is kind of a little bit of on what the ecosystem is of the background and the origin and the history of all these issues. During the Q&A, I can tell you our journey as Infinity Foundation in encountering and engaging this whole industry over the past 25 years. We've gone through 4 phases. Phase 1, 2, 3, 4 in our own encounters, in our own ways of studying this whole industry. And we have now developed our own tracks of what we are doing about it, how we are proceeding into the future. I think the person has told me, okay, I have a couple more minutes, so I will use them. One of the important things to be able to do this exercise of understanding what is happening in this Kurukshetra is you have to be a warrior in the Kurukshetra. Otherwise you're just cut and paste, copy paste, sitting in like-minded rooms, like-minded people. This is a meeting of like-minded people. Most of the manthans and all these things that happen are very important because we reinforce each other. But you don't get trained as a warrior, as a general sitting in the VIP room talking to other generals and watching videos and saying how great you are. You have to go out in the battlefield, which means you have to face bullets. You have to face the firing that comes at you, and unless you know how to face it with courage and hit back, respond back, hold your ground, you're really not a warrior. You really haven't paid your dues. So if you are battle-hardened Kshatriya, then you have a certain perspective. And people, from that is the point of view that somebody based in the West, in particularly in the United States, and year after year, facing encounters in enemy territory, going there. I have been for hundreds of events where there is this many people. I am the only Indian and Hindu speaking up like this. I'm told I have 1 minute left, so So, when I started 25 years ago, it was very difficult to get Hindus and Indians to even take this matter seriously. I was told, you're a conspiracy theory, there is no problem, we are making so much money, we are building temples, and we have big houses, and look at so-and-so is rich and all that. They didn't realize the issue of identity, the issue of civilization is very different from whether or not you as an individual are doing well in your own money and in your own profession. They just didn't get it. The government wasn't willing to help, the gurus weren't willing to help, the friends of Indian organizations that are supposed to be protecting Hindu civic society and politics were not willing to help. So they stood on the sidelines to see where it goes, and if I'm successful, then they'll say, we'll come and join you. The difference is that today, I have a room full of friends and supporters like this, which makes my journey fulfilled. So what I'm happy to see is that 25 years has not been a waste, it has been worth it because so many people are here who are going to continue the fight into the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv. May I now invite a well-known historian, Dr. Koenraad, to address
Namaste, my name is Dr. Koenraad Elst from Belgium, Orientalist. You can read that here. I had given the organizers a PowerPoint. I don't know if that can be shown now.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, to start at more or less the beginning, you know that there has been European colonization. Now before that there has been a long time of purely discovery of India by people unconnected, starting perhaps with Pythagoras, in whom the Indian influence is very explicit, and that way see continuing. And I mean, you have, of course, through Arab intermediaries, for instance, Fibonacci, who introduced the Indian numerals, and so on, down to the modern Orientalists who used Indian insights into language for starting the science of linguistics and particularly Indo-European philology. Can I have the next page? I don't know if I can change that here. Oh, yes. Well, then came colonization. I skipped the Islamic colonization, not at order here, but then we get the gradual influence, impact upon Indians who start developing an inferiority complex and start taking over many Western ideas, even when thinking that they are fighting them. Like the Arya Samaj was fighting against both Islam and Christianity. In the meantime, it borrowed very important concepts from Protestantism, like monotheism, with Veda translations where Indra, Agni, Varuna and so on, they are all translated by one word, God. Anti-iconism, including limited attempts to destroy idols of temples of other sects. The idea of an East-West dichotomy with the materialist West and spiritual India. The Aryan invasion theory is a case in point, where that was taken over with all its political implications, and in fact developed further, but not the important part of it, the historical method and how they arrived at it. And coming more to the modern age, ideas like nationalism, which has very much animated the Hindu Mahasabha and RSS movements, but also egalitarianism, which has influenced pretty much everyone, but especially Nehru, Congress, the communists. Nowadays also political correctness, whenever there is some cultural issue, I hear at least some Hindus veer much towards the far left and saying that Hinduism itself has always been liberal and in favor of free abortion, gay marriage and so on. You know, this is all seriously exaggerated, but apparently Hindus have always been, for the last at least 150 years, eager to live up to Western ideals. It is like, and here I borrow a likeness invented by Shri, it is like as if Indians would accept, yeah, the white skin color is superior to the brown one, but we are whiter than you. The influence goes far and wide, even with people unconnected with or not saying explicitly anything about the relation between India and the West. Like, for instance, this Hare Krishna usage of the term demigods for all the gods except Krishna. J.G. Arora, a very fiery pro-Hindu columnist, has titled one of his pieces, "Caste is totally un-Hindu." You see, I agree that thinking about caste should be more nuanced than the blanket condemnation that is usual in the West, but that is the other extreme. For example, right now in the evolution towards minority reservations, the idea is being pushed that the majority owes it to the minorities. Now in America, whether reservations are a good thing, you see, that's a whole different debate, but the historical fact that blacks once were slaves of whites, that's just there. Whereas in India, to say that Muslims, you see, have to receive a debt from Hindus is ridiculous. Historically, Hindus became Muslims precisely to gain advantages, like to win a court case or to not have to pay jizya. Okay, now, and this is perhaps one of the most important points I do want to make, very much of that Western influence has been taken over by Nehruvians and their dependencies, Ambedkarites, Dravidianists. And so nowadays, maybe the ideas are from the West, but the faces you have to deal with are Indian. And so, you see, I see all these internet polemicists talk about, oh, we are still slaves to the Queen and stuff like that. You see, that is hopelessly anachronistic. If, for example, in India the effective official language is not Hindi but English, well, that's not anything England or America is imposing on you. That is Indians who have chosen to do it that way. So you see, many activists like to continue that colonial era moral equation of we are victims, look what they do to us. By now, you see, you have more or less control of your situation. Okay. Another important element of Western impact, well, not really impact, but specific relation with the West, is the circular argument of authority. It starts like this. Secularists want to push some particular anti-Hindu point. You see, they make it known to the West. In the West, by now, everybody is aware that in India there are two parties. There are the good guys, which is the secularists, and there is the bad guys, which is you. So they immediately fall in line. They say, yeah, we support this. And so the next thing is that these Indian secularists, they go to the Times of India for a big interview. Look, you see all the Westerners support us. With the idea in the background, the enlightened West. You see, if they say it, it must be true. A perfect case in point was the Ayodhya debate. where all the Western scholars, including several that had added more evidence to the established or the old consensus case that there had been a temple at the site, they all suddenly said, no, there was no temple at the site, it's a Hindu concoction. And so then that was brought to India. Look, you see, and in fact, that is also why I am standing here. I became suddenly a known name because I dissented from that sudden Western consensus. And so that was suddenly news, even though what I said was totally banal. It was a complete consensus until like 5 years before that. Right, in a more complex way, that dynamic is also now playing out in the Aryan invasion debate. Of course, that is a Western idea that came to India, but nowadays the attitude of many Western scholars has been dictated by their Indian friends. You see, who insist, you see, anything that plays into the hand of the Hindutva people, that must be countered. So you get a total stonewalling. Like the work of Shri, for example, a very high quality, is totally ignored. I personally have agreed with 3 different Indologists to make a review of it. All 3 have declined. One of them explicitly said, well, I can't find any fault in it, but I have to think of my reputation. On the bright side, of course, is the fact that India is less of a puppet and more the puppeteer. Many Indians also complain about the fact that the West has it in for India, that there is some big conspiracy going on against India. Well, I'm afraid that that is at best anachronistic, and it's mainly unrealistic for this reason. The West doesn't much care about India. When we think of the rest of the world, it is either the Muslim world as a source of trouble, or it is China as a threatening competitor. So India is more in the back row. In the Cold War, there was still an American attempt to break up India. Like Senator Moynihan said it explicitly. But you see, that was at the time when India was perceived as a Soviet ally and so on. Right now, policies are more realistic. Also on the Chinese side, you see, they enjoy any trouble that befalls India, but it's not like they are engineering a breakup of India. Real attacks on India only come from Pakistan, which is an increasingly irrelevant country. Also, any worries about conspiracy against India are misplaced, not so much because they postulate a conspiracy, but because it concerns India. You see, there is nobody has anything against India, but very many people inside and outside India go in for the kill against Hinduism. That's a different thing. For example, the attacks on this very conference, they all emanate from Indians. As far as I've seen the list, Ambedkarite groups and so on, FOIL, a forum of Inqilabi leftists. So, I mean, no American is going to come out of his bed to protest against this movement. Then the story in the media about India, rape country. Yes. And I can assure you that this is very seriously meant. And it has already reached the second stage of disinformation. The claim does not have to be made. No, you see, it is referred to as something already known. Some consensus matter that doesn't have to be discussed. Everybody knows it. That of course is very much the creation of an Indian crowd. There was this research that found that number 35, I think, Indian sexologists and sociologists and so on decided that India must be the worst country in the world for women. So that's not imposed on them. And the figures from the United Nations and so on, of course, totally gainsay that. It's just not true. The impact on the perception in the West is very big. See, I regularly hear women say like, yeah, I love traveling, I'm going to Egypt next month. But India, I don't want to get raped. You know, that this has really caught on very quickly. On the other hand, as far as I can tell, I don't have my finger much on the pulse, but the Western story has no impact on India. What has an impact on the gradual change in behavior in India is simply the ongoing women's emancipation, which is an internal Indian development that doesn't need the West for anything. If there is any source of hate of Hinduism, it is caste. You see, some people say, for example, when the New York Times reports negatively on India, well, New York Times, racism. Now, I can assure you that racism has nothing to do with it. They have affirmative action policies in recruitment at the New York Times and so on and so on. No, what has to do with it is egalitarianism and the perception that Hinduism is exactly the opposite. And so you see the story of patriarchy, oppression of women and so on, that's also added to it. But the main thing is caste. As Mark Tully has said, whenever I say anything good about Hinduism, there is always someone to interrupt me and say, Hinduism is a disgusting religion because of the caste system. And that generally is the perception in the West. You see, whatever else they think about Hinduism, this very much is on their minds. However, while that prejudice against Hinduism exists, my feeling is that it does not have the passion that diaspora Indians bring to it. You see, to a very large extent, the motive factor for hatred against Hinduism is now brought in by native Indians. One more thing, a different topic, is about whether yoga is Hindu. So that's a debated issue. In America there is a large section that wants to deny this. In Europe I see hardly any of that. So they treat India as the mother country. But even though they know very little about Hinduism, but at least they make the right moves. You see, they utter some respect for the Hindu sources. Now, the effect in India, meanwhile, I notice that there is a lot of bringing in of Western culture of organization, and so you get yoga schools with yoga teachers who have a diploma after passing exams and so on, entirely untraditional. So I tend to say, you see, what Indians take over from the West is usually not the best part. So I'm sorry. The impact on Indians in general is very limited at the village level, because we tend to forget it. I think few of you are from the village, but you see, there is still a large part of India that is unaffected. Just as centuries ago, it was unaffected by Islamic rule. By contrast, in the cities, I see an ever-increasing urbanization. You know, whenever I come to India, I see more and more and more of it, which is just not what people go to India for. I mean, I don't want to romanticize it or anything, but somehow India is losing something. At the government level then, there they have completely interiorized the Western paradigm since Nehru, that Hinduism is backward, is to be shunned, is to be phased out in favor of what Nehru used to call our new temples, industrialization. So governments, and I dare say especially the present one, is completely besotted by the colonial notion of development. Therefore they have no interest in other issues like the choice of national language, like the anti-Hindu discriminations, and actual culture, which they more and more outsource to the wolves of capitalist competition. But fortunately, and I like to conclude on a very optimistic note, there is us. Thank you.
Thank you, Koenraad. And now I would like to invite Padma Bhushan, David Frawley, to address.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Namaste, Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So what I thought I would do is start a little bit with my own story, because I think it's in some ways a little bit different. Most of what I've heard tonight I would agree with, and starting with what Arvind has said, I will make some additions to that. But I come from a bit different background. My background was in Yoga Vedanta, starting about 50 years ago, in the 60s, and moving into the deeper sadhanas through there. And something got me inspired to look into the older teachings and the foundations. And that drew me into Vedanta Upanishads, Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's work, Ramana Maharshi. And then I also came into contact with Shri Aurobindo, who had a slightly different view, but still very Vedantic and very non-dualistic, transformational. So I actually grew up studying Shankara, Swami Vivekananda, and Shri Aurobindo for reasons I don't know. But in the beginning I did go through the Western philosophers, the existentialists, the Marxists, all of that, the psychologists. But when I found the Vedanta, it was all kind of diminished and even erased. So I was able to kind of move beyond the Western paradigm that I grew up with and look at it as something foreign and take upon a Vedic worldview. And then going through Shri Aurobindo's work, The Life Divine, he had little quotes from Rig Veda, which are very beautiful. And I had also developed a certain interest in symbolic languages, understanding fire, sun, moon, etc. Don't read fire, sun, and moon. They are inner psychic energies. And so I picked up his books on Rig Veda, The Secret of the Veda, The Hymns to the Mystic Fire. And somehow I was able to come into the Vedic world. And at that time I only had access to the gurus in America. And I was able then to listen, now into the 70s a bit, contact Sri Anandamoy Ma, at least by writing. And then in the late 70s, I was already writing for publications in India, and MP Pandit of the Aurobindo Ashram came to America. I showed him my work. I had done extensive work on the Vedas translating, and I thought it was my own personal nothing, just my personal study. And he said, this is great work, and we'll publish it for you in India. So I started a whole series of translations and studies of Rig Veda, Upanishads, even Shukla Yajurveda, starting in 1980, from there. And one of the things I found in the Vedic text was over 150 references to the ocean in Rig Veda itself. And I said, this is a maritime culture, a rishi culture, a yogi culture, and I'd also known something of ancient history from the rest of the world. And so I was able to recognize that that paradigm was wrong. And I could seize that what the Vedas said in the original language was very different than the interpretation given of them historically. And the historic, I can state this quite clearly today, the literary interpretations of Rig Veda you're getting from the West are totally wrong. It is a language of cosmology, cosmic consciousness, understanding different levels of our nature. Vedas start with Agni. They don't mean just Agni as an outer force. No, the Jataragni, the Pranagni, Buddhi, Brahmagni, Chidagni. It's all known to the Vedic rishis from there. All the secrets, Agni and Soma, are within us. Even in the Tantric Yoga, Kundalini, Agni arises, Amrit Soma descends. The rishis had all those secrets then. And India was a great, and still is. India is what we say that the biggest problem is India is a great dharmic civilization, and the West is ignoring that. The West has turned India into Indology, which is Indology is a footnote on Orientology, which is a footnote on Western civilization, and India is put in that particular context. The West has not yet discovered India. Nehru, in his discovery of India, didn't even get into the country. As far as the British universities, all the authors he quotes are mainly, of course, European. Even Shri Aurobindo said, talking about the Indologist, he says that they're playing marbles outside the temple gates. They haven't even gotten inside to the courtyard, and they have no idea what's in the sanctum sanctorium that is there. So this was the reality is that India has been the dominant civilization in the world, spiritually and culturally. And the West has become dominant now materially over the last few hundred years alone. But as has already been pointed out to some degree, the West owes a lot to India, not only for what it is digesting and borrowing, but even for its very origins. The Greeks were more an offshoot of certain Indic people than they were anything like any original Europeans. They had the same type of temple worship, they had the same type of philosophy, medicine. They had same type of iconography, dramas, astrology even. And so the West has created some vision of itself, but a lot of the deeper philosophy, even democracy, some of the deeper aspirations of the West come from the Greco-Roman, the Celtic, and the older cultures they call Indo-European. Now there is this myth of the Indo-European languages. Subhash has done some very good work explaining that. We two have worked together all these years. And I would have to give him also a lot of credit for anything that one of the things that we're exploring now is that a lot of what is called the Western civilization came out of this wave from India to the West. Koenraad's also talked about this out of India theory. And it's a very interesting thing because a lot of it wasn't that long ago. Only about 2,000 years ago, in fact, even less, 1,500 years ago, you had Indo-Iranian people, Scythian Shakas, with kingdoms from Punjab all the way to the Danube. And you also have this Gunjastrap cauldron. You also have a movement of ideas through the Silk Trail and other things. That route to India was also there. It was also through the Greco-Roman realm. And of course, the Persians were also a certain offshoot of the Vedic culture. Now, what happened historically is the Europeans wanted to discover their original roots. And so the Europeans want to be the original Aryans, and they invented that name for that particular purpose. But the fact is there is certain connections there. If you go back to the ancient Celtic traditions, they had a kind of Vastu-like sacred geography for both the land and for building. They had very similar ideas. But even more than that, just as the Vedic languages, the Indic languages spread west along with cultural influences, the Indic culture spread east all the way to the Philippines, and who knows, maybe even all the way to the Americas. And in that regard, you can find that the oldest writing, the oldest literature, iconography, history of Indonesia, even though we found out the Philippines, is essentially connected to India as well. So it was a powerful civilization, and the reason Indo-European languages spread so far because there was a dominant civilization behind them. And that was the Vedic civilization into Indian civilization, into various offshoots like Persians and Greeks, Romans, Scythians, and also cultural influences going on through the East as well. And so the situation is basically this. This Vedic, Dharmic civilization is the essential civilization for all humanity. We're speaking at the level of consciousness and connection to the universe as a whole, not simply an isolated time-space civilization such as defined in the Western world, but one that integrates us to the universe as a whole. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. I am Atma Brahma. Aham Brahmasmi. These destroy the Abrahamic tradition. These destroy Western civilization in the sense that they take us beyond the boundaries of a human civilization apart from nature, of a divine apart from us, and of a separation of human creativity from cosmic creativity. So essentially what we're seeing through India is the preservation of this core dharmic civilization of humanity. You have preserved it. It's absolutely unbelievable because everywhere else it has been pretty much taken down. And understand, they say, oh, Hindus are not united. Hindus are the only civilization united today after 5,000 years. Iran fell to Islam within about 100 years. The Europeans fell to Christianity. The Native Americans didn't have enough people or enough resources. The disease came in. So this deeper spiritual Rishi Yogi tradition of humanity has been preserved here, and it is awakening. Its awakening, of course, began in 1893, if not before. It was never totally asleep. And its awakening is going on today. And the struggle today is now this dharmic civilization is saying that we are India, India is Bharat. India is not the idea of India that Nehru invented, the modern socialist idea of the last 70 years. We don't need to bow down to that and follow that. And if India is honored in the world, it is India's ancient dharmic civilization, not the India of Nehruvian socialism. So now, the ghost of Western civilization in the negative sense, which is the Marxist, are the ones who are trying to hold the shadow of Western civilization in the negative sense over India. And what happened in India in 1947, India got its political freedom. It remained an intellectual dependent, or if not slave upon the West. In fact, it went backwards. Because Nehru and Indira Gandhi, they even pushed out the old Gandhian Congress from Mahatma Gandhi, and they brought in all the Marxist influence, the JNU, and the communist colonialism is the ultimate and the worst. Please bear that in mind. It is the fruit of all of them, and it holds all their poisons, the poisons of the Islamists, the jihadis, the evangelicals, the missionaries, the conversionists, and also the colonialists, the Macaulayists. They've imbibed all that poison, and they're continuing to insert that into the educational system and the academia of India, and that is the poison they think can stop this dharmic civilization from arising again. And the question is, why are they so against their own tradition? Well, first of all, they never study it. Show me any Marxist that knows anything about Vedanta or can have any dialogue with Vedanta at all. You cannot claim to be an Indian intellectual if you don't know at least the basics of Vedanta. They have what we call the Rajasic Buddhi only, which is dominated by ahankara, and it looks to the external world and to prestige, power, military force, money, and so forth. So we need a parivartana, we need a transformation in the mind of India again to awaken that higher buddhi, to awaken that honoring of the ancient traditions, not as tradition, but as this shruti, a drishti, as Rajiv was saying, resurrecting that vision. We need new rishi vision, yoga in the higher sense of the meditative mind, and this higher science which India brings in. There's been this debate whether India had vimanas and all these other things, and they're all laughing and saying it's a very silly thing. But India has preserved and developed the ultimate science, which is the science of consciousness, and no one can deny that. Through all the darshanas, we also have all the forms of Vedanta, all the different paths of yoga, all the different systems of Buddhism, Jainism. Compared to that inner knowledge, what the West and the rest of the world has is only a shadow. They have a certain sense of it. The scientists are beginning to look in that direction, but they don't have the real system or the practice. And that is why they're coming back to India for that inner knowledge. So, what's this? Last 1 minute. Okay. So spiritually, India is honored throughout the world, at least the gurus are. But what's necessary is that awakening into the society, preserving the essence of the social systems here, of the educational knowledge, the Gurukula, and to survive in the modern world, as I would agree with Rajiv, we've been discussing that for some years, we need the kshatriya, we need the intellectual kshatriya, and without having hard power, you can't have soft power, you need military and economic power. We need to spread the soft power again, also the yoga and the Ayurveda, all the Indian culture. It's such a dominant, powerful culture throughout the world. We're starting a first program on soft power through India Foundation later this year. So this awakening needs to occur. You are the people to do it. Your children are the ones who need to take it up. But you cannot inspire people half-heartedly. And you have to support this present government for another term, because civilizational and an institutional change that needs to be done. That takes time. It needs to be done from the bottom up. We need many institutions, many people working in different areas, but we need to take this vision of eternal India, Sanatana Dharma, the universality of this civilization, its value for the entire world. And if we hold to that inspiration, nothing can challenge us, because there is nothing equivalent from that in the other cultures and countries of the world today. It is the place of India to be the visual guru and take humanity forward for this new century. Shri.
Okay, we are now ready for questions. Please. We have a lot of time. We will all get our chance. I would request those posing questions to kindly first of all, identify themselves. Secondly, to identify the speaker, you would like to address the question too. And finally, and this is very important, to resist the temptation to offer comments. And only ask questions. Okay? Now, where are the mics? Yes. So, I saw this lady here first, I recognized her. And one question per person. You seem to be ready for a talk. No, only question. No comment, no. No, just ask the question. What is your name?
Streaming going, live streaming.
Please address the panel, you are addressing the group. Please I'm getting nervous. Question. Question.
Having Atma, okay? And because the Atma is total knowledge, I have question, okay? And total knowledge, I have given them A.
No, please ask the question.
They have to get all assignments which I do.
Don't listen.
Okay?
No.
Now the question is Young people are more geared to science. When I tell them that they have Atma, they deny it. They tell me that the quantum theory tells me that the four forces powers govern this universe. The quantum theory is telling them that everything is connected with the science.
Thank you very much. Now yes. Please calm down. Yes. Now, okay. Just a minute. Okay, I see many hands up. Okay. Now, just a minute. I'll start from this side. There's one person like this. Please ask the question.
My name is Arvind, and my question is for Dr. My question is for Dr. David. I want to start the study of Hinduism. Where do I begin?
Very good. Keep it short. It's working. Please tap it. Yeah.
Where should you start your study of Hinduism? Where do you live? Okay, you're in North Carolina. It's the important thing to do is to first of all understand that Hinduism comes from nature. It is not something simply coming from the outside. But I would say still start with a good teaching. Bhagavad Gita is still the most important Upanishads. And look to the example of some of the modern gurus. Swami Chinmayananda has very good teachings. Saraswati, Brahma Maharshi. But explore meditation, yoga, bring it into your life, connect to your family, go to temples, do things in India, and do things on the India side. But remember that it's all about looking within and discovering the universe inside you. So in that respect, that Janma Bhumi is that divine consciousness within. And that is what's made India great, is that that's been honored for so many years.
Yes.
My question is to Rajiv ji and Shastri ji both. That at the end of your lecture, you said that we need Kshatriyas, and you have been talking to Rajiv ji about it. So if you could kindly elaborate very briefly, on what is the implication of being a Kshatriya, not an intellectual Kshatriya, but a true Kshatriya in the literal sense.
I can only talk about what I'm proposing, which is intellectual Kshatriya. And to be an intellectual Kshatriya, you must have at least 100 to 200 encounters in the intellectual Kurukshetra, where you are alone or one of the very few facing an audience this size who are opposed to you, and you're going to stand up there, ask questions, give answers, keep your cool, not lose your cool, be very logical, and continue to defend your position no matter how much they insult you. You need to do that 100 times, 100 different events. It will take you a few years, and only then, that combined with study of the Shastras, second, third, guidance of a guru, and fourth, your own adhyatmic practice. So it's a combination of those four that build an intellectual Kshatriya.
I wanted to address the Kshatriya side. Yes. And first of all, Rajiv has put the intellectual Kshatriya idea very clearly in what he has said. The point of the Kshatriya in general is that you need a Kshatriya spirit to run a country. Country is not run by endless apologetics, compromise, appeasement, telling everybody. India has always honored the Kshatriya Dharma also. You also have in the Mahabharata, you also have the Raja Dharma. And in that regard, for the Kshatriya, ahimsa means reducing and preventing harm from occurring. It doesn't mean not resorting to the use of force. To feel in the political realm, you have to have a Kshatriya spirit also. It's not about everybody being nice and right and everything, wanting to make it all harmonious. You have to hold to the inner truth. And you have to hold to your values. All religions are not the same or equal. There's no karma, no rebirth, no moksha, no sadhana, no atma. In these other traditions, how can they give that to you? India has not had a strong enough dharmic kshatriya spirit in its leaders. And Shri Aurobindo said this was very essential to do. Throughout history, ahimsa was never a state policy, even for the Buddhist. So it's very important that people in the political realm have that kshatriya and dharmic spirit together, that they are intellectual kshatriyas, but they also know how to get to deal with opposition, with struggle, and to move forward for the future. And I think a current Prime Minister is a good example of that.
I see many hands up. So I'll have to devise a policy, reasonable policy for dealing with this. What I intend to do is that I'll first go through all the people standing. They have endured the discomfort of standing. And then if we have enough time, I'll come to each row. For that question. Oh, okay. No. This is well engendered. The whole thing is well engendered. Okay. So we start from this left. Now, in this row. Anybody here asking a question? Right there.
So my question is on caste. Okay, as Dr. Elst mentioned, Rajiv has discussed this situation, this issue of caste is a problem for us. So, what do you recommend? How do the Hindus who are living in the U.S. deal with this onslaught that you're a casteist and all that? What is your strategy that you recommend to deal with that? And that question is for Rajiv, Dr. David Frawley, and for Dr. Elst.
Yeah. In Holland, which is just near where I live, there is a 150,000 strong Hindu community coming from Suriname. And they have no caste anymore after 200 years out of India. And so they hardly still get that question, and occasionally still happens. But you see, their answer would simply be, what are you talking about? Now, here in America, to the extent that I know people here, I have the impression that likewise castes are retreating, is disappearing. So the question doesn't ask itself anymore. And in fact, that is the Vedic situation. In the family books of the Rig Veda, there is no caste. Then the notion appears in the Purusha Sukta, but even there's no talk about you are determined by birth, you have to marry someone from the same caste, and there's all not there, no caste system. Then it gradually appears, like in the time of the Buddha, you can see that there is clearly a conflict between the patriarchal view of caste, that you have the same caste as your father, regardless of what your mother is, and then the endogamy view of caste that becomes the classical one. So for a bit more than 2,000 years, caste was historically linked with Hinduism, but it was not the essence of Hinduism, and it can also disappear.
I think that's an excellent answer. But now I will answer
First of all, we just want to say this kind of caste division was all over the world. The British were among the worst who had it. Mexico had 18 different castes based upon the poor Native Americans at the bottom and the pure Spanish at the top. So these divisions of society exist in the tribal world, in the ancient world, the medieval world. They lasted a little bit longer in India in a certain negative way. But back to the original model, in the Vedic view, human being is, say, Purusha Vedam Sarvam. Purusha Sukta, the human society is one organism. The different varnas are different functions of the same organism. So the real message there is human unity and difference of function, and that is what we need to go back to.
Okay, next person out there.
So this question is for Rajiv ji. You probably have more following on social media than this entire room combined. But if we consider ourselves as your military force here, the government force, what can we do to the next level of education in terms of training our teachers appropriately in middle school and high school, getting professors at academic universities to have an accurate portrayal of Dharma civilization, and things of that nature where we could bring it down to our communities, our libraries, and things like that?
So our program consists of 4 parts, 4 channels, A, B, C, and D. And if you are part of our group, then you plug into any one of those. Track A, we're doing original research. So if you're a research-oriented person, say this is where the Varna kind of aptitude comes in. Depending on your aptitude, you can fit in. We have a place to fit in. So if you are the intellectual, research-oriented person, you call us. We welcome you to come and be a research assistant, become a co-author, and we within a few years launch you as one of the scholars in your own right. Related to that is the second track. We have a conference series to produce scholars, and those of you who are interested, I have 4 volumes of 50 scholars output in 2018. This is just work done by our scholars in 2018. There will be 4 more volumes by the end of the year. So we are producing a large army of people who can continue this kind of work on our wavelength well beyond into the next generation. Then the third track is we are taking all this knowledge and we are turning it into e-learning courses. So those people who have an aptitude for e-learning, who want to make courses for, we are developing courses not only for schools and colleges, but the Indian Foreign Service, for policymakers, for different segments of society. And I'm also interested in making a course for Hindu gurus because they need to be re-educated on these matters. It's one thing to know the text and the adhyatma, but the smriti has to be rewritten and adapted for every era and every epoch. And you have to do purva paksha of the opponent. And hardly any of them have really gone outside their cocoon of the ashram and really understood the global culture to be able to engage it and give a proper response. So the gurus also need this re-education. That is the third track. And the fourth track is social media, people who are filmmakers, people who are translators, people who are writing blogs. We welcome them to join this group because, we are no longer a one-man show. We already have several dozen people maybe a few hundred people, and we need thousands, we need tens of thousands of people, so we can take this force multiplier and also move it into the next generation. So I appreciate what you are saying, and anyone who's interested can contact us and tell us which of the 4 tracks you'd like to join, and we've got them. Thank you.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, my question is regarding, so all that I've heard today and yesterday are the problems that we as a society face, but I find a common link here is that most of the critical obstacles are there at the executive. So we have problems right from an institutional trouble till the Indian constitution itself, which has certain tenets which is not conducive to Hindu insurgents. So how important is it for an executive to step in and break the shackles that we are in? Or can it happen just purely based on our individual effort, and can we go beyond, and even if we don't have a conducive executive, can we make a change? Or executive really important to break that shackle for us?
Now, who will take this?
Well, I have recently written quite a bit about it because, well, my sleeve is being pulled by an increasing number of Hindus, especially Kashmiri Pandits, who just complain about the non-action of this government on everything that concerns them. And here in America, again, I've heard a number of voices in the same vein, concentrating in their case mostly on the issue of education, where Hindus are at a great disadvantage, ultimately because of the Constitution, or at least the interpretation of the Constitution, because the Constituent Assembly definitely did not have in mind to discriminate against the Hindus. But since Indira, it has been reinterpreted that way, especially Article 30, so that the minorities have a number of rights that the majority doesn't have. So that was clearly not the intention. All you need to do is to approach the Supreme Court for an authoritative interpretation, which will probably go the way Hindus want it. Otherwise, you have to announce an amendment to the Constitution. And if you fail, then at least you have a beautiful issue to take to the voters. So at any rate, yes, I think that their government initiative is absolutely necessary and should have happened 4 years ago. However, before you conclude, oh, but then we should vote nota, or we should simply stay at home on election day, and of course also because of David's advice for the elections, I want to insist that I am not advising punishing the BJP through the elections. Why not? Well, obviously, and as you all know, the alternative is certainly worse. And I need just name one person to make my point clear. It is Yogi Adityanath. You see, he would never have come to power if Congress was in power. So, you see, I am very dissatisfied with the Hindu commitment of this government. However, you see, all the people who joined the BJP, I don't know right now, there must be many opportunists joining it. All those who joined the Hindu movement, the RSS, do so because of the Hindu feeling, because they want to do something for Hindu society. And so once in a while, one of them comes up, becomes, for instance, chief minister of a state with 200 million people. And so, you know, just to have that, it is certainly better to vote for the BJP. Even if it's, you know, not doing enough, it is a better alternative than all the others.
Okay, hold on. So, the answer continues. Yes.
Yes, when we said this is a generational issue. When Modi took power, every institution in the country was bankrupt, and he's been dealing with a swamp, essentially, a marshland, the toxic bureaucracy, limited support, limited finances, the need to deal with overseas issues and resources, and essentially build India not simply from the bottom up, but also by having to remove the sludge and the negativity. And I think that infrastructure work is largely done. And I think if we get another 5 years, we can, foundation work is done. I think if we get another 5 years, we can build the rest of the structure and go forward. Patience is necessary at a collective level. Things do not happen overnight. There's a difference between envisioning a house and building a house, particularly in India. And we cannot enthuse people to vote if we say, oh, he's not as bad as the other guy. It is the positive spirit that we need because the Hindu force is resurgent. You can see it. It's still struggling to break through the surface here and there. There's still tremendous work to do, but without the confidence and the determination and the enthusiasm, we cannot awaken support and go forward. As Vivekananda said, Vivekananda was there with nothing in America. And he still said, arise, awake, and he exuded that confidence. We need to have that spirit to take this work forward. We are going forward. The work is not at all done. There's much more to do. We've made many mistakes. There's much more positive things that we can do, but we have to have that spirit to take us forward. And we do have the people in this government who have that spirit, whether it's also Shivraj in Madhya Pradesh. There are many leaders here that we have, and we just need more of them. And we have to do some of the work. And the educational work has to start in every Hindu home. Do not wait until any institution tells you. It has to start with you.
Going back to the original question of what is the kind of executive power required, I feel I'll give a very sharp, crisp suggestion. The Indian government needs, at a very senior cabinet level, people of the caliber of Dr. Subramanian Swamy. Yes.
A question right in front of me, yes.
Now we are getting into the political conversation.
Okay. Yes.
My name is Hemant Trivedi and I'm a PhD student in religious studies. I study Sankhya Yoga and I wanted to ask So my name is Hemant Trivedi and I'm a PhD student in religious studies, and I wanted to ask, how do we get Western academic discourse to take seriously the inner experiences of the gurus and the different traditions, and to stop focusing too much on the context and focus more on the content?
Yes, what it is that you see, we had a discussion with, for example, with Lama Semten, who is the Visarnas, who says all the dharmic schools agree, different philosophies, samadhi praman. There has to be deep meditation on these things. The Western schools do not have that. Their praman, their proofs only are logic and reason and consensus and discussion and all of that. We have to emphasize the importance of meditation and the darshanas, and that without that direct experience, you really can't talk about it. You're like someone talking about art who's never done any art. So we have to introduce that. And that meditation is coming in and needs to be given that interior basis.
So your question is what started my quest long time back, because as a meditator, as somebody interested in the inner world, consciousness studies, I found that in religious studies, in the religious studies department, there were zero emphasis, they didn't even want that. So I went to them and said, how come when you go to the consciousness studies people, they're all talking about Indian consciousness ideas, and you are saying it's bogus. They said, well, this is religion, you have to take that to the psychology department. So I went, so I'm just telling you, this is very important. So I went to the psychology department and I found that they are studying these things that you want, so maybe you're in the wrong department. So they are studying these things, They study, Jung studied all this kind of spirituality, but that was done as part of psychology. And the psychology department would then refer me to something called cognitive science, neuroscience, consciousness studies. So within the academy, they have compartmentalized departments. Religious studies is driven off of the knowledge that comes out of anthropology and social sciences. So they are studying the outer world, caste, how women are abused, how minorities are abused, this kind of original empirical evidence of the external Vyavharika, Laukika world is compiled by anthropologists and social scientists, and this comes into religious studies and they come up with what this religion or that religion is all about. So religious studies is stuck in their idea of hermeneutics, which is a Judeo-Christian way of studying other people. And so religious studies I've been hitting at, back and forth for 25 years. It really hasn't changed a whole lot. It's a very robust and a very stubborn institution. If you want Indian consciousness studies, engagement with that, you go into cognitive sciences department, you will see that it's thriving. The problem there is different. The problem there is appropriating, repackaging it, calling it their own under fancy terms, and disconnecting it with the Vedic sources. So in the religious studies, it's anthropology, caste, cows and curry, negativity, and in the cognitive sciences, they are at the cutting edge of all this research. They're really quite sophisticated, but they want to deny the Vedic sources, so the battle is of a different kind. So that's how the layout of the academy is today.
Yes, sir. There was a conference 5 years ago in Vienna about the history of yoga, and so a few things were encouraging. Most of it was not. They were determined to deny much history to yoga. In fact, of Hatha yoga, the usual thing was that it was invented by the British and that, back projected. Then about Patanjali, for instance, there was the leading American scholar, David Gordon White, who tried to belittle Patanjali, is not important. And then the next speaker, incidentally, enumerated hundreds of temples where there was a shrine for Patanjali. And Al-Biruni made an Arabic translation of Patanjali and so on. So he was really quite important. Anyway, but so there is still a very strong movement to belittle yoga as much as possible, to the extent that they have to accept it, and the fact is on the ground that it's becoming very popular, then they deny that it's Hindu. And so the easy way out is to say that, it came from the Buddha, and then it was borrowed by Hindus. Because of course, their main paradigm about this is Hinduism bad, Buddhism good. If there is something bad in Buddhism, it's a contamination from Hinduism. If there is something good in Hinduism, it was borrowed from Buddhism.
Okay, down the back, all those standing right here. Yes, please. Please hold on. Please wait for the mic.
My name is Neeraj. I'm from Philadelphia.
We can't hear you.
My name is Neeraj. I'm from Philadelphia. I'm affiliated to HSS. My question is, I just came from India, and I see a lot of the missionaries converting everything which is Hindu, like bhajans and folks. They just copy and just replace the name of our God with Isu or Jesus. How do we take this appropriation? Can we deal with it legally, or we just sit back and watch it?
Well, legally, nobody has yet tried the court system. I wish somebody would, somebody with legal savvy. I'm not a qualified legal person in India, because this is kind of a misrepresentation. You can't say that it's not a copyright patent violation because these things are not copyrighted, but it's a kind of a scam. Because what you are doing is you are fooling the public. So it is in the sense of fooling the public, a kind of fraud. So I think this issue of digestion of Hinduism into Christianity is going on and on. The dance, then this whole music, South Indian music, the Carnatic music, Kathakali, T.M. Krishna, all kind of things are going on right now. But nobody has, we are studying it, I'm studying it, writing about it and all that, but the ground action has to be legal. It also has to be, you know, a lot of the students who go to this Christian yoga and Christian Bharatanatyam are Hindus. Parents are ignorant, they're sending their kids to these places. There's one of the most important dance academies in New Jersey run by Christian, and he teaches you the Hindu version, the Christian version, as if both versions are equal. He teaches you both versions. He says this is the Hindu version, this is the same thing, this is about Jesus and Mary, and they're doing all the same dance kind of thing. And 99% of the people, maybe 100% of the people are Hindus. The parents are foolish, they just don't. And if I talk to them, they'll say you are controversial, you are divisive. So, you know, this is the problem that we are facing, that Hindus are supporting this kind of a problem that you are talking about.
No, please pass on the mic. No, down the line. Any questions here on my right side? Among those who are standing? No? Okay, you come to the first row. Any question here?
Namaste, my name is Ravi from Los Angeles. My question to Rajiv ji is, so in the context of the topic, responding to the academic challenges, should we start with counter narrative? Is that the approach, or should we actually work on creating our own narrative? What should take the priority?
Well, counter narrative is the Purva Paksha to respond to them. This has to be done. We are trying our best for a long time to do this. And then the Siddhanta, our own positive narrative, has to go hand in hand. So I consider our work to be two kinds: disruption and construction. Disruption means you take out the weeds, and construction is you plant the roses and the flowers. You have to remove the negativity, the toxicity, to create the soil so that when you plant the healthy plants, they will not die. If you don't pull out the weeds and the toxic stuff in the soil, no matter how many flowers you plant, they will keep dying. So you have to do the both jobs of the disruption of what the wrong scholarship is doing by going on attacking, and for that you have to name names. You can't say in general colonizers do this. You have to say, you know, Sheldon Pollock wrote this and here is why it's wrong. And Audrey Truschke is writing this and here is what is wrong. And Ramila Thapar wrote this and this is what is wrong. So we haven't had enough people doing the logical, scientific, analytical response. You need a huge number of people doing that. And then you need the constructive people who are developing what is the correct view of Vedanta and Ayurveda and yoga and all of those things. These two, the disruption and the construction, have to work together. That's the approach to take.
Okay, anybody understand? Mike, please. We don't have much time left, so I apologize to those here who were not favored by the luck of the draw.
I think the moderator is doing, the chair is doing an extremely good job of Q&A. Yeah, and we should continue.
Okay, if you are prepared to, if you are...
Second session after this, those arrangements.
Okay.
We have to arrange that. We have been conducting this for last day. So we are making sure that it's all done, people are happy. I mean, questions are raised, questions are raised.
Good job. Yes.
I'm Ann Dynan. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I have a question for Dr. Frawley. And this actually might be wrong. The question is whether or not you can address applying integral yoga, Shri Aurobindo's integral yoga concept, to what we've been talking about today.
Yes. First of all, I'm not a teacher of that tradition, but I am aware of it, and hopefully to some extent I understand it. The main thing that Aurobindo taught, which is very important, he said that a yogi should be able to do anything better than a non-yogi, because the true yoga, which he's not talking about asana, is the inner awareness, balance, integration, and surrender. So that a yogi is doing everything consciously. Mainly we're reacting, we're not responding, we're not creative. So we need to have that inner connection, and to put it in a broader connection, unless we're grounded in the inner self, unless we're connected to that Ishvara within, then we're just perpetuating some sort of karma and conditioning. So all life is yoga. Our lives should be yoga. But yoga is not just the mystical thing in the distance. Yoga is the right relationship and orientation of everything in our lives. And that is on a physical level of health, but it's also on the level of society and even of governance. If we don't have a dharmic society, there's no foundation for yoga. Dharmic society, dharmic living. India has preserved that model. And that model needs to be developed, and we need more new dharmic models of society, how to use technology, psychology, and that's based upon understanding our true nature as consciousness. We're not just this body. We are not just chemistry. We are not just physics, even quantum physics. We are the consciousness behind it all. Our inner self is beyond the body and mind. Body and mind are our instruments. So we need to go to that place of inner mastery, the pure Atma, that Vivekananda, that others, Swami Ram to emphasize. And India has always projected that Vedantic spirit of the Paramatma, the self of all. And you do not bow down to anybody. You represent, you always go for the highest. You don't just compromise at a lower level. And you have the potential to reach the highest. What is the Gayatri Mantra? Gayatri Mantra is your aspiration to this highest light of awareness. It is not just simply looking for some blessing. So here in the Indian tradition and Hinduism, there is that very high level of awareness aspiration that needs to be brought out. That old slavery mentality, everything is the same, all is good. No, we have to go to the highest, we have to take things to a higher level, and we can do it. And we have the knowledge, the tradition, the teachers, the practices, we have to live those, we have to manifest those, we have to bring those into the society. Overall, that is our true dharma.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And I think I have been waiting for a long time. Please, the last question.
My question is for David Frawley. This is regarding the Westerners categorizing caste and quoting Purusha Sukta, which says Brahmano osya mukhamasi bahura janyakutaha puru tadasla yadvaishyaha bhavya shudro ajayata. That is only a division of labor. It never says anything about differentiation of caste, nor have seen in anywhere in the Vedas, Vedanta Sutras, or Bhagavad Gita, the Prasthana Trayams. So, I was asking you, what is your interpretation as far as
Well, it's just as you say, it's one being. It's just a differentiation of function. No single human being can perform all tasks. So we do different tasks, but we are the same being. So essentially the message of Purusha Sukta is Purusha Vedam Sarvam. Everything is Purusha. We are all different functions of the same Purusha. We are all doing these different functions at different levels. So that the message is unity. And the message is that we should be willing to do whatever function is necessary for the good of the whole. That's Karma Yoga.
Okay, we have run out of time. My apologies to those whose questions could not be entertained.